Okay, so good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining the discussion today. My name is Amrita Chaudhary, and on behalf of CCAOI, I welcome you to this discussion, which is the CCAOI Manthan on the proposed Telecom Cyber Security Rules, which are being amended, and this discussion is being live streamed and recorded. And before I begin, a brief introduction about CCAOI. We are a trust engaged in capacity building, research, and advocacy, mostly in India, related to internet and digital policies for nearly 2 decades. And coming to this discussion, as many of you would be aware that the Ministry of Communications late last month released the draft the Telecom Cyber Security Amendment Rules 2025, which is aimed to improve cybersecurity, prevent the cyber frauds and incidents which are happening, and have sought comments on the same for a month's time, so which is like 23rd July. And this discussion is actually being facilitated to make the provisions of the proposed amendments more understandable and relatable, and to also provoke some thoughts on what is the regulatory framework India needs, and to encourage you, the stakeholders, to make your submissions by 23rd July. And the outcome of this discussion would be prepared in terms of key takeaways and suggestions, and it would also be submitted along with our submission and later on circulated. And today we have a distinguished panel of speakers with us who will provide their perspectives from the different stakeholder communities they come in terms of what are the hits and misses and what could be the way ahead and their recommendations. But before that, we would have Shraddhanjali Sharma from our team giving us a high-level overview of what this draft is all about. And our esteemed panelists today include Shahana Chatterjee from Shardul Amarchand Mangaldas, Parag Kaur, who is a telecom expert, Dr. Mahesh Uppal, who is also a telecom expert, John Kyangte from Microsoft. And thank you, John. It's very difficult to get business to actually come and speak. Thank you for being here. And Garima Saxena from the Dialogue. We did try to get people from DOT to come and speak, and even from the telecom operators. Unfortunately, we weren't able to get a speaker. The agenda would be shared in the chat, and the chat would be moderated by Shraddhanjali. And just a few housekeeping rules before we start. We want the discussion to be as interactive as possible. You can share your views and comments. If it's a question, you can mark it as question, so for easy identification. And if it's a comment, as a comment. During the open house, we would like to take as many questions as possible. And in case you can raise your hand and we would try to take it. And do mention your names and affiliations. While we want an active, discussion, but we would request you to be mindful of being courteous and respectful to all differing views. No personal attack or abusive languages should be used here. It should be a safe space. And as the timing is tight, I would request all the esteemed speakers to keep to your time. And with that, Shraddhanjali, over to you for a brief overview of the proposed amendments. 7 minutes, if you could finish within that. Thank you.
Thank you, Amrita. Hi, everyone. I'll just give a very brief overview of, also let me know if there's an internet lag. I'll switch off my video, Amrita. So I'll give a very brief overview on the proposed amendments to the telecom rules of 2025, the proposed amendments, and yeah. So as we all know, like we are all aware that the telecommunications rules were notified in 2024. The entire idea was basically to have a framework for cybersecurity for telecom services. And this year, in last month, 24 June 2025, we again had we had the ministry release a set of amendments for the draft rules that were released last year. So I'll just discuss few of the proposed amendments, what are the key amendments that has been proposed and what are the key concerns in brief. So the first amendment that has been proposed is the introduction of a new entity called the TIUE, that is the Telecommunication Identifier User Entity. So if we look at the draft, then we will see that it has been described as the description or the definition, it says that it's a non-licensed entity who uses the TSP services. So these are mostly those entities, those digital platforms who uses the telecom services for user authentication. So we must have all seen that when we log on to a digital platform and we want to, we have those authentication services, we receive the OTP, we provide the OTP. So any digital platform who are using this OTP services or the user verification services, they will be considered to be entities, or they'll be considered to be as the telecommunication identify user entity, and will be governed by the telecom rules. This is the first key amendment that has been proposed under the rules. Then the second one is the mobile number validation platform. So MNV platform has been introduced as a centralized verification mechanism for all the telecom identifiers. So the idea is basically to check that all the people who are using this verification mechanism, whether they are genuine or not. So you'll see that the identifiers are required to move or go through this centralized verification mechanism, and there are two rates that has been provided in the proposed amendment. So when you go through a voluntary method, then there is a INR 3 rupees for voluntary request, and if it is directed by the government, then it's a INR 1.5 per request, and these are routed through telecom operators in real time. So this is the one another key amendment that has been proposed in the rules. And the third is that the IMEI management and reuse prevention. So it says that the telecom equipment manufacturers, they have to prevent the reuse of tempered IMEIs which are active on the Indian networks, and also to check that whether there are tempered identifiers or not. And also used device dealer must verify the IMEI before resale. So these are the three key amendments that has been proposed, and some of the key concerns. So this is something that I'll just list it out because we'll be discussing this in much more detail today. So the first is the regulatory overreach and the overlap with the existing laws. So we already see that we have a lot of regulations governing these digital platforms. We have the IT Act, we have the certain directions, we have sectoral regulations, and now we are trying to bring these entities, these digital platforms who are using OTP verification mechanisms under the telecom rules, just because they're using the telecom services. So this is one of the concerns that has been raised, that there is a regulatory overreach or there is an overlap with the existing laws. The other thing is that for the MNB platform, we will see that there is a request per query request fee of 3 rupees and of 1.5 rupees. That is per query there is a fee. So this also brings a lot of compliance burden on small businesses or on startups, and there's another layer of compliance here. Then the other thing is regarding the privacy and surveillance risk, and also lack of procedural safeguards. So we see that there is nothing that has been mentioned in the rules regarding the data protection. Like we don't know how the consent framework will work when there is request regarding when the MNB requests are being routed through the telecom service providers, how the data security protocols will be, how the consent framework will be, how the data will be protected. We don't have a lot regarding that in the amendments. So these are some of the concerns that has been highlighted are some of the concerns regarding the amendments that has been proposed in the telecom rules. I think I'll just end it here. Amrita, over to you.
Thank you so much, Shraddhanjali, for giving, and do note this is a very high-level overview which she had been sharing, and that gives us more time to go into, discussion with our panelists. And, I would have two round of questions rather for the panelists. And my first would request if you could keep to 4 to maximum 5 minutes per intervention, that would be great. And you can contradict each other if required. And we would go in the sequence of Shahana first, Parag, then John, then Dr. Uppal, and Garima. Because Garima also would share something about the discussion they had late last week. So she would bring in some key inputs from there. So the first question is, could you share your perspective on the key issues in the draft amendment which is being proposed, the hits and misses from your perspective? And Shahana, over to you.
Great. Thank you so much, Amrita, and thank you for this event and for inviting me and to discuss this at really the right time when we have just a couple of days left to submit comments on these draft amendments. Shraddhanjali, thanks for the overview that you provided. I just want to add to a couple of more things that stood out to me as key issues in these amendments. And again, I want to articulate them as issues that have kind of caught attention, right? Without kind of going into how good or bad or hits or misses, because I think we can discuss that a little bit later. So I think the one, obviously the primary objective of these amendments was to solve for the problem of cyber fraud, right? Which we know is achieving scales, unprecedented scales. And this is not the only mechanism that the government is trying to curb and to mitigate the risk of cyber fraud and to ensure cyber security. There are a bunch of other mechanisms that the government is putting in place. So, I think that it'll be important for us to keep in mind that that is clearly the overarching view here, right? Is that we want to see frameworks and the government wants to put in mechanisms to try and curb the risk of or to try and mitigate cyber fraud. I think the other interesting thing about the rules, even when they came out last year, but also about these amendments, is that the focus on digital implementation has remained, right? All of the mechanisms that are being discussed are digital platforms or are the creation of databases. Yes, it is interesting that the government has put in place this kind of financing mechanism as well that will be used to finance some of these platforms, but the focus on digital implementation remains. Now to come to some of the more substantive issues that the amendments have brought in, of course, are the two new concepts of TIUE and an NMV, which folks on this call would already be familiar with. But what is interesting is that not only is it an introduction of these two new concepts, it's also an extension of existing obligations that have been brought. There are existing obligations under the cybersecurity rules that have been made applicable to TIUEs. So, for example, to the extent that it was authorized entities who were expected to comply with directions around prevention, of misuse of telecom identifiers, that obligation has now been extended to TIUEs as well. And of course, there have been an introduction of new obligations also. And I think this is where things get a little bit murkier and a little bit more unclear. Now, TIUEs will have to be subject to a whole host of new obligations. The government will be able to seek a very, very broad category of data from TIUEs. The government will be in their decisions to block the use of certain telecom identifiers, also require TIUEs to potentially permanently block the use of those telecom identifiers. Separately, the government may also, if they believe it is necessary, from telecom identifiers that have already been blocked, ask the TI, share that list with TIUEs and say that, listen, we expect you to not use these telecom identifiers as well. Now, these are very, very onerous business impacting obligations that TIUEs will have to be subject to. And I want to leave a little bit of discussion around, what are the hits and what are the misses in some of these issues that the amendments have introduced. And I'll wait for the next round of discussion on that, Amrita.
Thank you so much, Shahana, for actually raising the suspension part also, which is pretty critical. And Parag, over to you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. So I will like to go logically step by step. And so I really don't disagree with the government's objective of curbing cyber crimes and all those misuse of telecom identifiers. But anything that the government does has to be done under a framework. and the power that the government has to come out with the cyber security rules, the power emanates from the Telecom Act. As if you look at the paragraph, front paragraph, which says that the power confirmed by section 1, section 1 of subsection 1 of section 22, read with clause 5 of subsection 2 of section 56 of the Telecommunication Act, we do so and so, blah, blah, blah. So what I'm trying to say is that this rule is emanating from the Telecom Act. Therefore, we have to deep dive into the Telecom Act and to see whether these rules actually resonate or maps with the Telecom Act or not. That is how you should look at it, because anything that I want to do everything, but I don't have the power to do anything which is not under the Act, right? So if you go step by step, first thing I would like to point out here, section 56(1) of the Telecom Act, which says that the government has got power to make rules, but the rule cannot be inconsistent with the Act. That is point number 1, right? So we have to evaluate these rules, whether they are inconsistent with the Act or not. Now, go to section 331 of the Telecommunication Act, which says that the power of the government to give licenses or authorization, whatever they call it, or exempt an entity from authorization which are offering telecom services and equipment and using telecom equipment. Now, telecom equipment and telecom services have been clearly defined, right, under the Act. So, if you have defined telecom services, if you have defined telecom equipment, then you really don't have an empowerment to bring another entity called TU. What is the name of the entity? Telecom Identification User Entity, right? So this entity is called TIUE. That entity does not emanate from the Act. So you can't really bring an entity which is not mapped to the Act. That is the very, very important point which we need to understand. Because if the rules get expanded to do everything that they want, then there is no sky is also not the limit, right? You can go wherever you want. So the TIU is not empowered under the Act. It is absolutely an definition which they coined out, which doesn't have the support of the Act, and therefore it does not go further from this. Whatever the government intention are, that does not propagate further from this particular point, because these are not empowered by the Act. So when it is not empowered by the Act, then you can't really give direction to an entity which is not defined by the Act. And if you really want to extend this, and I'll tell you the fallacy of the situation, it is so fallacious and hilarious that even hospitals will use telecom identifiers to identify the users. There will be various kind of entities who are going to use telecom identifiers. You will go and give direction to hospitals not to give services to an entity who has misused telecom identifiers to cause harm to telecommunication network and telecommunication services, because cyber security laws are clearly, if you look at the clause, which is the clause number, I'll tell you the clause number 22(1), which says central government may rules to protect and ensure cyber security of telecom networks and telecom services. That's the contour under which their rules have to be formed. Now, hospitals are not going to have any kind of impact on telecom. So I'm not just making it up, right? It may not get extended to that, but they are also using telecom identifier. Whoever uses telecom identifier will fall under this Act. I'm not going to go further on this because this is going to be a very, very long discussion, but just trying to give you a flavor. And then others can add more value. Okay?
Nice intervention. जो हम बोल रहे थे ना सुबह में वही है बस हमने वो equipment identifiers ये सब नहीं
Thank you so much. There is someone who has their audio on. If you could request, I would request if you could mute it. And John, I'll come to you because Parag has raised an important question that can it actually happen? Can you have a new definition coming in? So from the private sector, how are you looking at it? What are your concerns on it?
Yeah, hi, good afternoon, everyone, and thanks for the opportunity, Amrita. And it's an honor to be sharing the sort of dice which very
Can you be a bit more loud, John? I think you're a bit, the
Okay.
audio's a bit.
Let me just see.
If others can hear, then it's okay. But you were a bit faint. But you can continue, I think.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, better. Thank you.
Yeah. So okay, it's I said it's a privilege to be sharing to be a co-panelist with such distinguished people. And see, uh, I think the being at Microsoft, I think it's given us a vantage view on various things. I think one is the misuse of various technologies that we often use for various productive uses. It's often misused, and at Microsoft, we process more than around 84 trillion signals per day. That is around 2 billion signals every day. And from our vantage point, we see almost around 600 million criminals and nation states attacking various sites, various signals. And more than 7,000 password attacks are blocked per second. That's around 220 billion annually. And these are big numbers that I'm throwing at this discussion. But when it happens to someone that you know, or when it happens to you, then I think the perspective really change. And therefore, I'm bringing out this point to also understand the point on the urgency on the need to tighten cybersecurity and make India safe and make the digital landscape safe for everybody to operate. However, we have enough experts, I think, in the room here, so I won't get into the legality of the legal issues. But I think just very top level observations. I think this draft amendment will have far reaching consequences and impact on the digital economy. And it'll be interesting to see the interplay of these rules with various other sectoral rules, especially the ones in the financial sector, like your RBI cybersecurity regulations, your SEBI regulations. And what we're seeing is that in the last few years, Amrita, I think we're seeing a lot of regulations coming up from various sectors. I think it's important to see that these regulations are harmonized and that there are no overlap. Any regulations should be minimal and therefore I think we'll have to evaluate that. I think we just have, I think, about 30 days to analyze this draft rules and its impact. So my first submission as an industry representative here on the panel is that we definitely need time. We need time to see what are the potential impact, not just from a compliance point of view, but look at it from the engineering point of view, right? From how companies will have to realign, redevelop their engineering to align to these regulations. And those are indirect costs that would be incurred by various players, not just Microsoft, but even the small startups. And so that's something we definitely need to evaluate. And therefore, I think there is a requirement for more time for the consultation. The second point I just want to quickly make is that we are seeing that there would be a cost incurred for making every request. And that cost could be significant. Just before this session, I looked at the TRAI data, and there are about 1.6 million SMS generated daily. And out of that, a significant portion of that is going to be OTPs. And so therefore, for a user who is already paying for the telecom services, the additional cost that they would have to incur is something we might want to sort of reevaluate as an industry and see what are the benefits of this. And because of the additional compliance and the cost that that would come along with complying to these rules, you might actually deter people from using mobile as a verification and authentication. So the regulation might lead to an unintended consequence of people using alternative means of authentication. So therefore, these are the couple of points I just want to put it out for us to deliberate on and think about. I'll pause for now. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you so much, John. As in, you raise very important points because, yes, everyone understands there is a concern, there is a issue, but would this help in addressing that concern? And if businesses have to realign, would it be easy for compliance? As in, would the restructuring be easy? And from an end user perspective, is it going to cost me? And what happens to my privacy? I think those are certain questions we also need to think of. And there was another question, and I'll go to Dr. Rupal now. Dr. Rupal, can DOT actually also, suggest what is the rates which a particular entity can charge, etc., like it has as has been mentioned, the particular amount for any transaction, etc. This is just a question apart from the other things you wish to speak about. Dr. Uppal, you are muted.
Yeah. No, of course, the answer to your question is probably not, because if as Parag mentioned, the idea is to bring all these people under some kind of telecom, if not directly, indirectly under telecom kind of rules, then the power to set tariffs, etc., is exclusively that with the ERA. But that is probably the least important part of our exercise at the moment. Now, as almost all of us agree that cybersecurity is an extremely relevant, significant, and a valid concern. There can be no two ways about it. The problem, I think, as they say, is that if a job is worth doing, it's worth doing well. And I think that is where we are goofing. And obviously, the draft rules, as Parag pointed out rightly, invoke the Telecoms Act, even though the Information Technology Act, which covers most of the people or most of the entities that are going to be impacted, actually has extensive provisions relating to cybersecurity. So, whether it is unauthorized access, whether it's cyber terrorism, data retention, surveillance, blocking, all of that is covered under the Information Technology Act. And as we know, there has been talk about amending and updating this act for many years. And now I believe the Digital India Act has been put in cold storage. But be that as it may, the point is that the Telecommunications Act was never supposed to deal with these issues. And of course, as we again has been pointed out, just to mention, I will have very little unique or points to make, but please bear with me. The draft rules, of course, apply to both the telcos as well as OTTs. So whether you're a Jio, Airtel, Google, Facebook, Uber, or Zomato, you're all, as they say, Gadha Goda Sab Ek Barabar hai. So that is one big problem. But the key issue, of course, is that they are blurring a very clear division between regulating telecom services and regulating OTT services, for which there has been an endless talk and discussion, and yet we seem not to have learned our lessons. And that I do believe that this the whole issue of telecom identifier user entity is, as many have pointed out, is too broad and too misleading. And it is something that will, in fact, I believe, hurt both the OTT players as well as telcos. As John just pointed out, it's not as if telcos are going to be thrilled if all the OTT players move to email for their verification. If that is what they're going to be forced to do because of the burdensome nature of the new rules, then clearly even telecom revenues would be impacted to some extent. And obviously, as far as the OTT players are concerned, they are of course faced with much greater compliance. So clearly that is not something that we would like. And of course, again, has been pointed out, the whole idea of a mobile number verification platform is a very good idea if all these things can be consolidated. But unfortunately, it also has some major risks, particularly in the formulation that we see in these rules. And for instance, it does allow the wrong people to even ask for and seek information, personal information. If all I have to do as an OTT player is to pay a fee and get to use this MNV, then that itself is a problem because it will also be an incentive for rogue OTT players. And that is not something we want. And so something which was meant actually to improve cybersecurity might also have, as John again pointed out, unintended consequences, which we need to be worried about. So the key point is really that these are very poorly thought out rules and amendments. And I think the sooner we get rid of them, the better it is. And I'll come back on this in your second part. I think I should stop here. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Uppal. Thank you so much for this. There are 2 questions in the chat. We'll take it after the first round of questions. Garima, over to you. You had a discussion late last week, and there were a few takeaways and lessons you had from that discussion from different stakeholders. Would you like to share that, and what are the perspectives which Dialogue is looking at, on this proposed amendments?
So firstly, thank you for having me, Amrita. It's a pleasure speaking alongside such distinguished experts. So last week we had a consultation on the draft amendment, and honestly, I think all of us know that we're left with more questions than any of the way forward or any of the suggestions we might have. We have more and more questions that we're looking for ministry to answer and maybe respond in the consultations that we send across. Some of the major issues have already been highlighted by all of the experts. Mahesh sir, Parag sir already talked about the regulatory expansion of the Telecom Act through the creation of TIUEs, which also signals a regulatory overreach. Plus, it also shows that there is a lack of legislative backing when it comes to this legislation in particular. Second issue is that we've seen that the amendment is trying to create a parallel enforcement power which exists under Section 69A of the IT Act. The government has the power to suspend or permanently block any of the telecom identifiers without any prior notice or appeal, which again raises concerns about regulatory overreach and how they would be carrying it out. The third issue is with the mobile number validation platform. There is no scope, there's no clarity on purpose and scope of such platforms. And there are no specific risk thresholds that we might want to be looking for. It calls for voluntary and government mandated verification, which may ultimately lead to the entities TIUEs causing data triangulation and potential overreach. The nature of validation responses is also not clear. Are we looking at just to confirm linkages, or will they be seeking out more of deeper data such as KYC, subscriber information, SIM information, and all of that? There are certain cost implications that are also attached with the platforms. We have 3 rupees per validation request when it's a voluntary request and 1.5 when it's a government mandated request, which again raises concerns for smaller businesses operating in this space. One challenge that I don't think we have talked about much is how does the scenario look for shared devices and non-standard usage which occurs in India, particularly when it comes to having multiple people having ownership of one device. How will the validation work then, and how will we be verifying, and if the same person is the one attached to this device, and that again creates critical points of failure. Even if we create a central repository, it will be very important to ensure that there's no downtime or bottlenecks during the entire validation process, because that may ultimately lead concerns to real-time authentication. So another point that I really wanted to talk about is how there's a need for more legislative dialogue and conversation around this. We've seen that DOT, along with other regulators, MeitY, RBI, and all have been trying to regulate fraud, spam, and scam in their own ways, but they haven't been really coming together and talking about it. Like, how do we break the silos? Who gets to do what? So these are some of the primary concerns we have, and I think I've made the point. But I think, like John said, we need more time with this. We need to understand how they're going to implement and work this for all the players. And if need be, if this really has to go into implementation, we need to also ensure that the risk threshold in place for users, for businesses operating in different business profile, and the amount of money they're making, etc. So happy to expand on any of the points, and maybe I can come in later.
Thank you so much, Garima, for sharing those points. There's Amol asking, should we send a joint letter requesting for extension? Yes, Amol, we could do like we did for many of the other aspects like competition, etc. Before I go to the next question, there were a few questions which were shared. Rohit Sharma was asking, how will these cybersecurity regulations impact satellite internet providers like Starlink that depend on large constellations? Do the regulations include any specific requirements for securing hardware? Sagar asks, the draft rules don't make any explicit distinction between user authentication and identification. Would this be a fair reading, or the intention would be to include both within the ambit? And Siddhant Gupta asks, how do we expect the four set of rules to be interpreted, particularly with DOT and TRAI's intent to revise the licensing framework for telcos, move to an authorization scheme? So these were the questions which came in. In case you want to respond to it separately, you could, but I will also ask my second question to you, which is, now we have the concerns and other issues, which all of you have raised, and many had been shared with us also. Could you share your recommendations on how the proposed amendments can be improved, and so that we can ensure that the cybersecurity issues, concerns could be addressed, or what could be the way to address them? We can't solve the entire issue, but what could be the ideal way, by not inhibiting trade or compromising privacy of users, and even the security of users, because if encryption is broken, there may be issues. So your thoughts on this, and perhaps Shahana, I would start with you first.
Oh, great. Thank you, Manthan. I've noted some of the questions as well, and fantastic questions, but let me respond to your question first. One is that it's really good to see a consensus of views across the speakers. I haven't been on too many panels where that has happened, so that's good to see. I think the starting point would be that we need to take this consultation very seriously and engage and submit feedback as part of this consultation. It'll be very, very important to draw the government's attention to these concerns, and these are very significant concerns. These are issues of substantive law. These are not operational challenges or the industry belly aching about how we're going to achieve compliance. These are very significant issues that we do need to draw attention to. So I think the first point would be that everybody, we really encourage everyone to engage in this consultation and to submit feedback. And in terms of the feedback itself, agreeing with everything that my panelists have said so far, is that we really do need to encourage the government to think about what is the legal basis on which they are extending the cybersecurity rules to TIUEs. And this is a fairly faceted problem, because we're talking about who really are these TIUEs, right? We're looking at a massive set of stakeholders. We're looking at not just all of the stakeholders that we've identified so far, which is anyone who provides a digital service using your telecom identifiers any health tech, fintech, any BFSI entity, any entity that does any sort of authentication, identification, verification using your telecom identifiers could be considered a TIUE, right? And are we saying that we are going to be, in fact, even your brick and mortar stores that use your phone number to send you digital receipts could be considered a TIUE. So are we saying that now suddenly one of those stores is potentially going to get a notice from the government seeking an undefined category of data simply because it is related to the telecom identifiers that they're using? So we really do need to refine and rethink the legal basis, whether it even exists or not, right? Like Dr. Uppal and Parag have pointed out, and John as well, that it's the Telecom Act under which the cyber security rules, which are subordinate legislation, have been formulated. The principal legislation applies to authorized entities. These are entities who are conventionally licensed telecom service operators. And to the extent that you are a licensed telecom service operators, absolutely, this is the framework under which the government does have the ability to impose these sorts of obligations. What is the legal basis then on which you're extending these obligations to non-authorized entities? And these are, again, very, very significant obligations. And if you even think about it, Amrita, in the context of the fees that a TIUE has to pay for validation, right? I think the counter argument is that yes, Aadhaar also expects you to pay a fees when you're seeking authentication, but the entities who are seeking that type of authentication are limited number of entities authorized by law to do so. And now we're talking about this undefined group of TIUEs, many of which, like Dr. Uppal pointed out, could be bad actors who are simply taking advantage of the MNV to validate phone numbers for creating even more cybersecurity risk. How have we defined in this subordinate legislation, where we've had no problem to define TIUEs, but we haven't gone far enough to define what are the checks and balances we're going to have in place, what are the access controls we're going to have in place, and how are we going to mitigate the security risk that is being created, right? So I think the very first concern is to rethink the legal basis on which we are trying to define TIUEs. Who are we intending to cover? Because we are really today covering everyone. And that certainly cannot be the objective. And it certainly, I think there will be alternative methods to achieve cybersecurity. The other issue, I think, to me, which is really standing out, is that there is a very, very significant lack of clarity about how this entire blocking and validation process is going to work. And, unfortunately, the way it has been set up is that one process kind of bleeds into the other without really defining any of the contours or the safeguards. So we know that there is a process by which the government can seek the shutting down of telecom identifiers if it believes that there is a cybersecurity risk, right? Now, the notice is actually issued to the person to whom that telecom identifier has been issued, which, Amrita, could be you and me as well. We are holders of a telecom identifier, right? And if the government has received a complaint and believes that, I am using my telecom identifier to send out fraudulent messages, I could receive a notice. Now, the role that the TIUEs will play in this process is that once a final determination has been made, a TIUE could receive an order saying that, listen, we've made this determination, and you have to permanently stop the use of that telecom identifier. Now, unfortunately, it is bringing back a lot of the discourse that we had around not having adequate safeguards, even for the parallel 69A type of blocking processes. Those same arguments exist here. How is a TIUE, which again could be anybody today as per this definition, expected to validate, expected to ensure that this order is complied with when the impact of this order is so significant and when the process has not been defined clearly enough? There is also the power of the government to apart from this, if it believes it is necessary, from a list or from a database of telecom identifiers that have been blocked, share that list with any party, including a TIUE, and ask them to stop the use of that telecom identifier. Now, these are very, very significant processes that will impinge on entities' ability to undertake business. It could impinge on privacy. It is going to be incredibly hard to comply with these orders unless there are safeguards in place. And unfortunately, a lot of this is going to be subject to challenge because it may not have enough due process. And so, and we've lived through all of this, right? We are currently still dealing with intermediary guidelines. Portions of the intermediary guidelines being challenged because the sponsored legislation has overstepped the principal framework. So I do feel like, definitely needs more consultation. It needs more refinement of these mechanisms. I think there is absolutely principal agreement that we do need more holistic and comprehensive mechanisms to deal with cyber fraud. And I completely agree with John that right now, a lot of what we are seeing, across regulators and across sectors, or directions of cybersecurity have been fragmented, have been very, very narrowly focused on a particular sector. And there needs to be a little bit more holistic thinking about this. So I think those would be some of the concerns. I think on a more, minor point, or a slightly, a lesser critical point is that there is also this expectation for, those who are selling and purchasing used telecom equipment that have IMEIs. Now, of course, there will be a more substantive aspect of that market, but we're also talking about a market of like resale of old phones or even small smartwatches, which our kids are now using, right? We're talking about a massive market, and now we're asking the sellers of those used equipment to log on to this platform, pay 10 rupees per IMEI that they are trying to validate to make sure that it's not tampered. Now, again, I think the principle behind it, the concept behind it is absolutely great, right? Like this is a mechanism that we do need to have in place given how massive this market is. But perhaps this is not the way to achieve it. So at the very least, especially when the amendments are talking about setting up and creation of these digital platforms or these processes, we need to not mandate them. We need to, at the very least, make them voluntary. We need to sandbox it. We need to have it run at a very pilot stage first to see whether it meets all of the requirements of the DPDP, of the Puttaswamy tests, whether we have enough safety protocols in place, whether we're able to determine access and limit access, and then perhaps think of it, the extension of those mechanisms, then think of it on a more longer term basis.
Thank you so much, Hannah. As in, yes, a voluntary may still be a better move rather than, making it mandatory, because we don't know how things will pan out. And yes, a holistic view is definitely something which I think in most of the rules, that is what everyone's been articulating about. Parag, over to you. And do remember, Vikas, if Shraddhanjali, if you could mute Vikas Saraswat. Parag, over to you.
So anything specific that you want me to address, or you just want me to tell what the...
No, as in what could be perhaps the way is something, and there were these questions which we had in the chat.
Okay, we'll talk about the question later. But since you said that the emphasis should be what should be the way out.
Yes, what should be?
Yeah, let me just focus on that, because the questions can be, definitely the questions are important. But this is very important, that what should be the way out. First of all, let me tell you that what the government is trying to accomplish using these cyber security rules, they will not be able to accomplish, because these are very poorly drafted and they are not thought through. Let me give you the reason for that, and I would like to make it very simple so that go step by step logically, right? Now, the Telecom Act and the cyber security laws are really driven towards protecting what? Protecting the telecom network and the telecom services, right? So there is a definition of telecom network and there is a definition of telecom service, right? Now, the point here is that the telecom network and the telecom services are fundamental. Fundamental in the sense like if you block a telecom identifier from the network itself, and if your KYC process is robust and solid, then that telecom identifier, even if it is used for identifying a person to do food delivery services, it should not be your concern. You cannot have the power to prevent even the person who is eating food, prevent that services from being accessed. It is not within your jurisdiction. Your jurisdiction is, or your intent should be, to block a fraudulent activity happening within the telecom network and within and jeopardizing telecom service. This is fundamental to understand. Now, let's understand this. Whether we have a robust network to prevent any kind of damage to the telecom network and the telecom service, do we have a robust network today? Probably not. Why? Because our KYC system is not robust. Okay. So the government should be focused on making the KYC system robust. So this MVN platform which the government is trying to create is a step in that direction. What does it mean? You have got Bharti Airtel, you have got Reliance Jio, you have got Vodafone Idea. Everybody is doing their own KYC. A person committing a fraud will go from one network to another network. So they will keep on changing identifiers, right? So if you have a Aadhaar level validation, then how can the person escape and then he goes away and takes a different number and enters the network? So first thing first, that you have to make the system, it should prevent the system to become porous. That should be your main objective. After you have made the system robust and prevent all these kind of insertion into the system from fraudulent people, you can take away the telecom identifier, those people who are using them, and prevent those entry into the system. This is the first principle that you have to follow. Second is that the Telecom Act identifies users. Very clearly, they identify users, and the users are to be penalized for misusing telecom identifiers and IMEI number. Clearly, it says that you can't. So there are penalties already into the cyber security rules, which are being, if you look at the earlier draft of 2000, or not draft, the cyber security rule, the original one of 2024, there are already penalties there. So if you want to penalize the user, please penalize the user. Now, if you can't control your system, your telecom operators do not have a robust mechanism to control, what additional advantage that you will get if Zomato provides you with any kind of information? You tell me what additional advantage you're going to get. Suppose, let's say, if a telecom identifier who is already under suspicion being used in the telecom network, and you have got full power to block it, and if the telecom identifier is used by Zomato, and you ask Zomato, please give me information, what purpose you solve? You solve no purpose at all, because you have all the basic data and information right with you. He has committed a fraud within your system. If he commits a fraud with Zomato system, that's a police issue. That's a different issue. You are not concerned with Zomato. You are not concerned with Blinkit, right? Why should you be concerned? Because those are issues which are beyond your realm. You have a responsibility to manage your domain. Please manage that. Please do that work first. Please don't get involved into some other people's work, right? So that is the point which you have to understand. So I do not understand the foundation of this act, right? We can keep on saying that, you have got prices, you have to pay money. It does not matter. Let's focus on the principle. What principle, what problem you're trying to solve? I can go on and on and on. I don't want to, because I respect other people's time. So I will just stop here, because I find it very frustrating, And
Right.
that's why sometimes, it gets I become passionate when I speak. I do not understand the logic. Why this act has come? This rule has come. Anyway, thank you.
Thank you so much, Parag. I know John has to leave. So John, over to you. And I also have a question to you. This MNV we are creating, are we also creating a single point of failure? Because, everything, the so-called data is supposed to be there. What about the cyber threats there, considering it's a huge repository of data, if it happens?
Yeah, I completely agree with you. Yes, it is a single point of failure, potential single point of failure. And I think Mr. Parag has captured many issues. But coming to the point on recommendations, I think one recommendation I would suggest is that, as in terms of process, the National Cybersecurity Coordinator, the acting National Cybersecurity Coordinator, in one of the forum mentioned that there is now a National Cybersecurity Authority, where National Cybersecurity Secretariat is the member secretary. And one of their mandate is to ensure that all cybersecurity regulations are harmonized. So I think it would be good to make a small submission to them because obviously we are seeing, for instance, if you look at data request, there are already provisions empowering different authorities in the country to request data from a service provider. And the problem is if there are additional authorities or additional process defined here, then it just creates confusion for the platform or the service provider. So these are things which like I said in my previous time, we would need to revisit. And I think for me, I'm not, I could look at, e-commerce platforms using OTPs, but I think the biggest use is going to be the financial sector currently where OTPs are used, right? And like I said, 7,000 identity attacks per second is what we are seeing. It's what Microsoft is saying. I don't know what the other platform providers are. So therefore, there is definitely a need to sort of streamline that with the existing provisions, whether it's the IT rules, whether it's the RBI directions and the SEBI guidelines and the frameworks and many others cybersecurity regulations. So I think that's the first recommendation that I have in terms of process. The second one I would want to just for all of us to think about is also that there is obviously the misuse of these mobile numbers. These mobile numbers, for instance, from the little that I know, is that, for instance, there are these virtual number providers that are giving cyber criminals virtual numbers which they can purchase for a few dollars. And they use those virtual numbers to authenticate an account. That could be a social media account, it could be a email account, it could be various accounts. And those accounts are being misused. And therefore, law enforcement authorities are really struggling to catch the culprits. And therefore, there is an urgent need to be able to validate numbers. But like I said, the recommended approach, is it the best, is I think something we should definitely question. And if there is room for improvement, if there is a better alternative that we can achieve under the existing frameworks, that would be ideal, as opposed to bringing out more regulations, which leads to more compliance. So in terms of objectives and in terms of the spirit of the rules, we're definitely aligned, in terms of keeping the country safe, in terms of keeping everyone, the citizens safe, the enterprises safe. But there is a need to look at, definitely need to revisit this, but also at the same time realize that these problems are problems that we face. These are problems that our law enforcement face on a daily basis. If you speak to folks from I4C, they would tell you the amount of misused numbers that are being misused. And therefore, there is at the same time an urgent need to solve this problem. And therefore, I don't have the sort of silver bullet or the the ideal solution that we could, but I think we can definitely come together and think of a better solution to make the digital landscape safer. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much, John, and thank you for joining in. I know you have a hard stop now, but thanks for joining in and
Thank you
sharing.
so much, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Rupal, over to you. And, I also had a question. We have numbers which are blocked, which are put up on the website, etc. There is a parallel process which is happening, and this has also come up. What are your views on this? Because everyone's talking that we need to harmonize things, have it in a more synchronized manner, etc. You've been looking at this for a long time. Your views on this?
Well, am I audible? Yeah. So there's really not much to disagree with any of what previous speakers have mentioned. And I think what Parag hinted at is really the crux of the problem. The problem really is that we have failed to create a robust KYC mechanism. And if we have created one, we are not using it properly. If Aadhaar is that, then we are not using it properly. But the point is that we are in a situation that whether it is Aadhaar, whether it is the voter ID card, as we've just discovered, even the Election Commission has doubts about its own voter ID cards, and so on and so forth. So I think our real problem is that KYC is critical, I believe, also to cybersecurity, and we haven't really nailed that. We haven't really solved that problem. And I think the more resources we spend on creating a robust and a straightforward solution to the KYC problem, the better we are. Because I think whether it is what is being attempted here through the MNV or what is being attempted in Bihar, etc., these are all patchwork. They are patchwork to address a problem that the KYC was supposed to address and has not. So, and once we address that, then a lot of these problems, I think, will become a lot more manageable. I think what John mentioned is something that we all knew, but I didn't realize the scale of what we are talking about. I think the rules that we are talking about are absolutely unimplementable. I think what we will see is that they will be implemented either patchily or selectively, etc., and creating more problems for us. So I think unless the rules that we create are simple, enforceable, and principle-based, we will not really be able to address this problem. Especially now, actually, people have, I think Shana pointed out the issue of, I think even Garima pointed out the problem of, multiple users of the same device. You also have another problem that occurred to me, which is number portability. You have issues like, suppose I surrender my phone number today, and in fact, I'm sure some of us have numbers that previously belonged to other people. Once a year, I get a call from somebody who's looking for somebody who had a number 10 years ago or 5 years. So all that problem would also be an issue. If you're going to block a particular telecom identifier, then the various avatars that identifier may have had are also now going to be a problem. So I think the crux of what I'm saying is that we do need to deal with the KYC problem in a robust way. And the second, because that is also at the heart of this, which is the distinction between the users, between the network providers and the network users, or the applications that ride on that network. Unless we are clear and we have a principle-based distinction between the two, some of these problems will always go to the wrong targets. Some of them we will seek solutions at the wrong ends. Because like Parag pointed out, it's a lot easier to simply block a particular number using telecom services. But if you're now going to start worrying about whether that user should or should not be allowed to access, e-commerce services or or something like that, then you're really in for some very serious compliance issues and very serious enforcement issues. And I think the moment you have a situation like we have in our tax laws, that they're so complex that they are unenforceable and they have no credibility. And this is the last thing that we want in something to do with as serious issue as cybersecurity, that the laws or the rules or the regulations lose credibility. And that certainly is a real risk if we are going to use these rules at this level. I'll stop here, but happy to take more.
Right. Thank you so much. Garima, over to you. If bigger players like Microsoft have issues in compliance, etc., what about small players? As in, they don't have that kind of capability, resources, or even that much, their problem is whether they want to start their business and innovate or, do the compliance game, I would say. Over to you for your thoughts.
No, absolutely. I think for MSMEs and smaller businesses, there are already a number of, I think, around 1,300 compliance requirements that are required to undergo. And if we bring in such more compliance requirement, we will see that there will be less innovation in the digital space. And there will also be concerns around what would be the operational implementation look like and how will they technically manage it, etc. I also wanted to come in and maybe share some of the recommendations that we've been looking at the dialogue, as well as some of the ones that we collated during our stakeholder consultation. So first of all, I would like to say that we should clarify the legal basis on which these amendments have been introduced. Secondly, I think it would be good to have clarity on coordination rules across regulators. We need to know the boundaries and coordination protocols between DOT, MeitY, RBI, CB, CERTIN, etc. I think it would be good to also have a clear differentiation between what identification and user authentication means. I think there are some questions in the question box as well around it, and how would that be interpreted later. Another thing I think Shahana already mentioned is we should go for voluntary and not mandatory implementation of this. And if this has to be really implemented, maybe we should look at something like a phased implementation with risk-based onboarding. And we would need more clarity around compliance timelines and what are the technical requirements that would be needed. Another one that I would like to also highlight is that we should maybe focus also on updating the cybersecurity policy that we have. It was last updated in 2013. It's been a while. If the actual objective is to tackle cybersecurity concerns such as fraud, digital arrest, it would be a good idea to also loop that in. Lastly, I would also like to say that we should upload the data protection principles in theory, whether it's during writing the laws or implementing such processes. It would be good to have that we are following purpose limitation, data minimization, user consent, etc. The last one is solicit more feedback from the stakeholders, and before you finalize the rules, maybe we should have a comprehensive stakeholder consultation around the rules. Yes, that was me. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Garima. And we do have a few questions if any of the speakers would like to speak. And in that time, if anyone from the audience wants to share their comments or even questions, or if you've been looking at it, want to speak on it, please feel free to raise your hands. I do see Debashish and others from BIF. In case anyone from BIF wants to speak, share their perspective, feel free to do so. Just please raise your hand. And for the time being, in case you want the questions again, I can put them in the chat. One was, how will the cybersecurity regulations impact satellite internet providers like Starlink? Do these regulations include any specific requirements for securing hardware? And Gitanjali had added, one of the objectives of the rule is validation of whether the telecommunication identifiers as specified by their customers or users correspond to the users as present in the database of an authorized entity or licensee. Now, there are platforms that take required phone number authentication like OTP, but does not require user verification or collect details of users upon registration. With that context, what does the process intend to verify, valid existence of phone number of the customer identity, which may not be possible as the platform does not collect customer details at the time of registration. Anyone who wants to take any of the questions?
Amrita, I'm happy to address that latter question you had. I think it's a great question, right? And I think it really captures the real life problems that these rules are going to create. Because you're absolutely right that there are platforms and digital service providers who will do an authentication but may not necessarily use that telecom identifier to process any further information about the user, right? Or it may be done for a particular period, or it may be done by a third party, etc. Now, think about this use case and think about the powers that these amendments are proposing, and think about the obligations that a platform like this could potentially be subject to, right? It could potentially get a notice from the government saying that, share all of this data that you have in relation to this telecom identifier. It could be asked to permanently not use certain sets of telecom identifiers. It could one day get a notice saying that this is a telecom identifier that the government has asked to block, and so you are also requested to no longer use this telecom identifier. It becomes an increasingly, the more you start thinking of the real life application of these proposed amendments to these very, very real use cases, the more you realize how it is going to lead to a situation which, like all of the other co-panelists have said, is going to lead to, it is not going to be implementable, or it is going to lead to a scenario where a lot of the TIUEs or a lot of the entities who are going to be subject to these obligations are not going to be able to fulfill these obligations, right? And so we really do, and this is I think, just to kind of reiterate the fact that we really do need to engage with the consultation process, and we really do need to submit this sort of feedback to demonstrate how it is going to be extremely challenging to implement what is currently being proposed.
Thank you so much, Shahana. Anyone else wants to take any of the other questions? I've just put it in the chat. Just a moment, I'll put all the questions. But if anyone wants to speak, I do see Amol from Cuts here, and there are others. In case anyone wants to share their perspective, please feel free. Don't feel shy. We would like to hear your perspectives too, if you have. So the questions are there in the chat once again. How do we expect the 4 set of rules to be interpreted, particularly with DOT and TRAI's intent to revise the licensing framework for telcos, move to an authorization scheme? And there was this Starlink question on the satellite internet providers. Do regulations include any specific requirements for securing hardware? And then there was this question about distinction between authentication and identification.
Well, if I may, Amrita, I'll try and see if I can answer the first 2 questions, whether it's the satellite stuff and which was the other one.
Right, and there was another on the, if new rules, the
DOT, TRAI.
DOT and TRAI are trying to revise the licensing framework for telcos.
Well, I personally think that the answer to all the questions is that neither of that will impact these rules as they are drafted. I don't think satellite operators are regulated or authorized by exactly the same legislation, so there is no issue there. And as far as the authorization scheme itself is concerned, it's de facto the same as licensing, other than the fact that some of these rules can now be, are no longer going to be based on negotiations between the licensed parties, but can actually be revised separately. But I don't think whether it is satellite communications or whether it is the current proposal to move to authorization will have any major impact on how these rules are interpreted or implemented.
Thank you so much, Dr. Upal. I do see Atul Jain's hand. Atul ji, over to you.
Thank you, Amrita ji. I have a question to Mr. Parakar.
Yes,
Do
please
you
go
feel
ahead.
CNAP, if implemented, can provide the solution to this problem?
Well, what is
Because
yeah, go ahead.
OTT players can use CNAP to verify whose telephone number is this.
See, look, there could be, I really don't know what CNAP you're talking
CNAP
about.
is calling name presentation.
Oh, okay. I understand now. See, look, the calling name presentation is a different issue altogether. I will like to make the following point here. As far as verification is concerned, the verification of a user done by a OTT player is based on a very clear understanding or trust that that entity has been already verified by the telecom player. Because telecom players are the fundamental entity who verifies the user, and therefore they assign the telecom identifier, right? So therefore, what happens is that once you are using a telecom identifier, which you know has been verified by the telecom players or the telecom system, then you trust that telecom identifier to identify your user to make the system more secure. That is the whole purpose of using the telecom identifier. That is one of the major purpose, and the other is that it becomes very little seamless to take on the subscriber in your app. So therefore, in a situation like this, where the telecom players play a very important role, and all the services, as far as the user identification is concerned, is percolating from the telecom network, then the app providers, if they are entangled into this kind of issue of identifying the user with no other verification process, they will be left on their own. And if you impose different kinds of rules and regulation on them, even the CNAP also is not going to be foolproof, because that's a separate discussion. I really can't get into a discussion like this because CNAP is a very, very complex topic. But verification of the user is the purpose of using the telecom identifier. They will use a different identifier if you are going to make this own process onerous. They will use email IDs then.
Thank you, Parag. And I think the discussion was the emails may have more points of failure than a mobile because emails are easier
That is
to
that
duplicate.
is the reason I'm saying. See, look, again, give me 1 minute more. What is the purpose of using a telecom identifier? The purpose is that it is robust, it has been already verified, and therefore it is trustworthy. Now, if you are it's yourself saying that this is not trustworthy, then where the telecom so-called TIUEs will go? They will have nowhere to rely on, and you can't really blame the TIUEs of identifying the user using a telecom identifier which itself is not verified by the telecom operators, because who has the resources to verify the telecom identifier? Tell me. It's only the operators have the resources, right? And the rest of the things are all secondary, Amrita. They are not important in this discussion at all. What is the price and everything? It's all secondary. Let's look at the core issue.
Right. No, I completely agree with you. And thank you, Anilji, for responding to the satellite question here. And Samriddhi had made a point that she's not clear how the MNV will verify the telephone identifier information and the output that will be shared back to the TIUE. The rules do not specify any limits for such output. This was a comment she made out there. Is there any other questions or comments for the speakers or in this topic? Gangesh, do you want to speak, Gangesh? Or should I read it out?
Hi, Amrita, everyone. Hope you can hear me clearly.
Yes, yes.
Yeah, hi. So this is Gangesh from Saraf and Partners. Thank you for the opportunity. In fact, in the previous discussion with the dialogue also, we had raised this that in our communication to the DOT, one thing that we need to clarify and request the department to clarify is the statement of objectives and purposes, because as vaguely as they have put it, if we don't clarify the exact objectives behind this, then our responses will also be inadequate. We'll be talking past them because the actual objective of this rules or regulations have not been identified. The other thing is, in terms of the scope of the department or the government to include new categories of stakeholders like the user identifiers that we've identified here. In the past, also, we have seen this with TCCPR and the unsolicited commercial communications regulations, that they have talked about creating a set of compliance requirements for principal entities and telemarketers and stuff like that. So it is possible that the department may extend the framework of governance and regulation to the actors, but the scope of that extension here is much broader than what we've seen in unsolicited commercial communications. But it's not unheard of, and without coming back with more constructive and clear arguments, there is very high probability that it will continue down the same vein. So, which is why I also want to sort of harp on what John had suggested earlier, that there should be a lot more of a coordinated communication from the cybersecurity authorities as well that's been proposed. So, just wanted to add those 2 points. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Gangesh. We are on top of the hour, but in case the speakers wants to share anything, I think what suggested was important, and even Dr. Upal, that the main issue would be perhaps to look at the KYC mechanism, perhaps make it more robust, more easy to use, and robust, so that the basic identification of a telecom user or a mobile user can be established. At least that part could be done. So a lot of issues perhaps could be addressed through that. Coordination between the different agencies. If there is a cybersecurity agency which has set up, perhaps have them in consultation and then look at the various regulations which are there and try to see how to synergize them or the gaps, rather than looking at it on a piecemeal basis. More consultation definitely is there, and apart from it, there the other things, as Parag was mentioning, are subsequent to addressing the basic issues. But in case any of our speakers want to say some last words, please feel free to do so. Anyone wants to speak or share anything? Okay, if not, I would like to thank all of you. Thank you for taking out this time and sharing the perspectives. That has been very helpful. We'll try to wrap up our report by tomorrow. It's difficult because what we see is 23rd as the last day. In case, and we'll try to come up with things. In case you have any points, especially Garima, the key recommendations, etc., if you could share with us also, we would have a look at that. And we'll try to add it to our submission. Obviously, an extension would have been good. If not an extension, at least more deliberation is what we should urge DOT for, rather than going in and making it into a rule. With that, I would thank all of you for joining in, and please do make your submissions. It is important. Because it's going to affect all of us at the end of the day, not just the small, medium businesses, but even us as individual users. So thank you, everyone, for participating.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Bye-bye.